The rescue log for 4:15 a.m. Sunday morning contains a single anomalous entry. According to air quality calculations conducted at the surface, the atmosphere at the bottom of the Hester pit had reached total lethality 30 hours prior. Carbonic oxide had displaced all breathable air. Life was no longer a mathematical possibility. Yet the log notes that the iron pump rods, extending 600 feet into the darkness, began to vibrate. It was a rhythmic, metallic tapping. The rescuers recorded the cadence. It did not match any known distress signal used by the northern mining unions. It was not an appeal for help. It was a measurement. 1862. The Hartley Colliery was a modern necessity of the Victorian British Empire. It was a single-shaft operation. One hole, 12 feet in diameter, served as the only entry for men, the only exit for coal, and the only passage for air. At the surface sat the engine, a massive 42-ton cast-iron beam, seesawing day and night to pump water from the depths. It was the heartbeat of the pit. Beneath it, 204 men and boys labored in the low main seam. The environment was defined by the relentless mechanical roar of the pumps. Without them, the North Sea would reclaim the tunnels in hours. In this era, industry was not merely a job. It was a constant, violent negotiation with the earth. At 10:30 a.m. on January 16th, the negotiation failed. The main pumping beam snapped. A 20-ton fragment of cast iron plummeted down the shaft. It acted as a piston, shearing away the wooden lining and the ventilation partitions. The debris jammed the shaft 140 feet below the surface. The exit was gone. The air supply was severed. The pumps stopped. 199 men remained alive in the lower seams. They gathered in the darkness, waiting for the rescue teams to dig through 30 yards of compacted iron and timber. They had oil lamps and a finite volume of air. The rescue effort lasted 6 days. During this time, the documented record begins to deviate from the laws of mining engineering. Thomas Watson, a survivor who had ascended in the last cage before the snap, was questioned by local magistrates. He reported that for 2 hours prior to the accident, the water being pumped from the lowest sump was scalding to the touch. The temperature in the low main seam had risen 15 degrees in 20 minutes. He also described a scent. It was not the familiar rot of stagnant water or the sweetness of fire damp. He described it as wet copper and ozone. On the third day, the tapping began. Rescuers lowered a weighted line to check for movements in the debris. They reported that the line was not being pulled by survivors, but was being inspected. The vibrations coming up the metal rods were described by the lead engineer, G.B. Coulson, as having a breathing quality. Coulson's private notes, later recovered by his family, state that the vibration was not coming from the miners trapped below. It was coming from the strata itself. On Wednesday, January 22nd, rescuers finally breached the blockage. They expected a wall of lethal gas. Instead, they found the air to be abnormally clear. The lamps of the rescuers burned with a preternatural brightness. The official inquest, led by coroner Stephen Reed, concluded that the men had died of carbonic oxide poisoning. It was a tidy industrial conclusion. The physical evidence suggested otherwise. The bodies were found sitting in neat, orderly rows. There were no signs of the frantic struggle for air typical of asphyxiation. James Amore, the pit overman, was found with a memorandum book. The final official entry is a farewell to his wife. However, the final 2 pages were torn out before the book was entered into evidence. A junior clerk at the inquest later claimed the missing pages describe a luminous gray vapor rising from the floor of the seam, and the observation that the coal walls were softening. Medical reports, quietly filed and never read in court, noted that while the men had died, their skin exhibited a localized calcification. Their hands and faces were brittle, turning to a gray ash-like substance when moved. The Hartley Colliery was never reopened. Following the recovery of the bodies, the Home Office issued an unprecedented order. The lower seams were not merely abandoned. They were to be sealed with reinforced masonry. The remaining portion of the broken iron beam, the piece that had caused the disaster, was never recovered from the shaft. It was left in the ground, buried under tons of concrete. The engineer Coulson resigned his post immediately. He was admitted to a private asylum months later. His medical records indicate a recurring fixation. He believed the rescue teams hadn't been digging toward the miners, but had accidentally provided an opening for something else to vent it. All official maps of the Hartley Low main seam were reclassified and subsequently lost in a 1920 Ministry of Mines fire. We view the history of the industrial age as a timeline of progress of man's mastery over the dark places of the world. But the records of Hartley suggest a different reality. When we drive our iron and our steam into the deep earth, we are not always entering empty space. Sometimes we are simply breaking a seal. We treat the ground as a resource. We rarely consider it as a ceiling for what lies beneath. The Hartley miners did not die in the dark. According to the last suppressed reports, they died watching something the rest of the world was not yet meant to see.